The Sons of Malice were once a loyalist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, but have since fallen to chaotic corruption. While many of the chapter's records have long been expunged from Imperial records, including that of their original name, founding, and primogenitor Primarch, the Sons of Malice were known to have once held the honour of being one of the Astartes Praeses, chapters that were founded for the purpose of defending the region of space known as the Cadian Gate, a task that the chapter would devote themselves fiercely for several millennia. The Sons of Malice were known for being particularly ruthless and relentless when conducting their various campaigns against any traitor Legion forces which emerged from the warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror, and would take great pride in the carnage that they would inflict upon their foes. This aggressive streak displayed by the Sons of Malice was at least partially adopted from the chapter's homeworld of Skelos, with new aspirants being recruited from the ranks of the world's numerous cannibal tribes. The cannibalistic traditions and religious beliefs held by these tribes would over time be integrated into the chapter itself, ultimately leading towards the chapter's descent into damnation. Inquisitor Solomon Pietas would bear witness to one of the chapter's cannibalistic rites, determining that such actions were proof of the chapter's corruption. The Inquisitor would lead a strike force drawn from 5 regiments of the Astra Militarum and a number of sororitas from the Order of Our Martyred Lady in an assault upon the chapter's fortress monastery. The Inquisitor's attack would prove to be a spectacular failure, as not only would the Sons of Malice repel their aggressors, but Inquisitor Pietas would be captured before eventually being sacrificed and consumed by the chapter's warriors. Word of the chapter's cannibalistic actions would eventually reach Terra, and the High Lords, somewhat surprisingly, would offer the Sons of Malice the Emperor's forgiveness, providing that the chapter embark upon a 50-year crusade of penitence. However, the then chapter master would refuse such an offer, stating the following to the Imperial envoy that delivered the High Lord's ultimatum.
"We have done nothing wrong. We shall not do penance to any."
Soon after this, a number of urgent communications made by Inquisitor Pietas shortly before his death would reach Terra. In response, the High Lords would declare the Sons of Malice as excommunicate traitoris, and ordered for an extermination fleet which included the Cadian 331st Regiment to make its way into the Skelos system, and subject the chapter to exterminatus. As their homeworld burned, the chapter would manage to escape the Imperium's wrath, before they ultimately sought refuge within the Eye of Terror. At some undetermined point during their history, possibly even prior to their excommunication from the Imperium itself, the chapter would dedicate themselves to the minor chaos god Malice, the hierarch of anarchy and terror, and eventually the chapter would rename themselves to the Sons of Malice, in honor of their patron deity. Despite devoting themselves to one of the chaos gods, the Sons of Malice would show no love towards their fellow traitors within the depths of the Eye, as the chapter would launch numerous campaigns of hatred and vengeance against both imperial and heretical forces, and over time the chapter would begin to fracture into a number of smaller warbands. The chapter's forces would reunite once every century in order to perform a rite that would see one of their number ascend to the ranks of the Doomed Ones, the Chosen of Malice himself. This ritual would see a number of Astartes competing against one another as they sought to make their way through the twisting and corrupted corridors of an ancient vessel known as the Labyrinth, which once served as the chapter's flagship. The winner of each competition would be granted the honour of joining the Doomed Ones, while those that failed would remain trapped within the bowels of the Labyrinth before mutating into twisted, grotesque monstrosities. When the 11th and final member of their order was determined, the Doomed Ones would be sacrificed as part of a great sorceress ritual conducted by the chapter's librarians. With the death of the Doomed Ones, Malice himself would be summoned from the depths of the warp, allowing him to walk and fight alongside his loyal followers. However, the events that unfolded in the wake of Malice's summoning remain unknown even to this day. So what could have happened following the culmination of this ritual? The first possibility is that shortly after manifesting into a corporeal form, Malice was swiftly banished back into the depths of warp space. Demonic entities can only exist within the material realm for relatively short periods of time, due to real space being toxic to such creatures. In order for such a creature to maintain a physical form, it must either parasitically bond itself to a mortal host, continuously be infused with warp energy, or be sustained by the worship of those dedicated to their patron god. Should such a warp entity fail to meet such requirements, then depending upon the power of the demon itself, they can find themselves being banished back into the warp after a matter of minutes or hours. It was this very fact that gave Imperial forces a much needed reprieve during the course of the First Armageddon War, as the demon Primarch Angron was unable to press the initial advantage that he held due to being forced to erect monuments to the Chaos Gods in order to sustain the demonic legions at his command, and prevent them from dissipating back into the Immaterium. The only major exceptions in this regard are that of demon princes, as due to being once mortal creatures, they are able to maintain their physical form within real space almost indefinitely, although they too can be banished back into the warp should they sustain enough damage. But assuming that Malice was not immediately forced back into the warp after being conjured into real space, there are still a number of possibilities that could have occurred in the wake of his manifestation. Some have suggested that upon the completion of their ritual, the Sons of Malice could have been immediately slaughtered by their patron deity. This idea comes primarily from the fact that the more powerful a demonic entity is, the more difficult it is to control by those who summoned them. Since Malice himself is stated to be nothing less than a god, then it is perfectly feasible to assume that such an entity would be completely uncontrollable. But while the idea that Malice butchered his followers is somewhat amusing in its irony, it would initially appear to be unlikely for such an event to have taken place. This is due to the fact that the Sons of Malice were noted to have taken part in the events of the 13th Black Crusade, having been persuaded by Abaddon the Despoiler to aid him and take their revenge upon the Imperium. As detailed within the novel Cadia Stands, a Sons of Malice strike force led by Captain Kanath would launch a violent assault against those Imperial forces that escaped the destruction of Cadia, leading to the Battle of Faith's Anchorage, where the traitors sought to annihilate the Cadian remnants in retaliation for their part in the purging of their homeworld several millennia earlier. The 3rd edition Eye of Terror Codex also mentions that the Sons of Malice were most active within the Skelos system during this particular period of time. The fact that the chapter is returning to the Skelos system leads to a second possibility regarding the series of events that could have occurred following the summoning of Malice, one that was intended by the chapter from the very beginning. As detailed within the short story Labyrinth, the reason as to why the Sons of Malice had summoned their patron god into the material realm was so that the chapter could reclaim what they deemed to be rightfully theirs, their former homeworld of Skelos. Sometime following the original purging of Skelos, as detailed within the novel The Chapter's Due, the world would be at least partially resettled by the Imperium, although the Scholar Progenium facility located upon the world would at some point be raided by the Iron Warriors Traitor Legion. Since the Imperium has appeared to have recolonized the world to a certain extent, then it's no wonder as to why the Sons of Malice had launched their own assaults throughout the system during the course of Abaddon's Black Crusade. While we have little to no information regarding the exact details of the chapter's exploits throughout the Skelos sector, if Malice was able to maintain his form within the material realm for long enough, then it's possible that the Renegade god could have led his followers into battle against Imperial forces. With their patron god fighting alongside them, the Sons of Malice could have potentially eliminated what small Imperial presence remained upon their homeworld, before finally reclaiming it for themselves. Malice could then have dissipated back into the warp following the culmination of this crusade, or may have perhaps even turned upon his followers, due to being an embodiment of chaos and anarchy. While there have been no reports of any godlike entity fighting alongside the Sons of Malice during their assault within the Skelos system, it is admittedly possible that such a creature may have been misidentified as an exceptionally powerful greater demon or demon prince. Alternatively, perhaps the Sons of Malice had simply left no survivors in the wake of their onslaught, which in turn could have prevented the Imperium from learning about the horrors of a Chaos God materializing into real space. But even then, the act of such a powerful warp entity emerging from the Immaterium could have sent, for lack of a better term, a psychic shockwave throughout warp space, which in turn would have surely been felt by various psychers, such as Imperial astropaths or the various seers of the Eldari. Nonetheless, this is all admittedly based upon the assumption that the summoning of Malice had occurred either slightly prior or during the course of the 13th Black Crusade, as an exact date of the summoning itself is never given. As such, the summoning of Malice may have occurred after the culmination of the 13th Black Crusade, perhaps even occurring long after the return of Rabute Guilliman or the events of the Plague Wars. What does loosely support the possibility of Malice being summoned just prior or even during Abaddon's crusade is that when the Sons of Malice were assaulted by the forces of Inquisitor Pietus, as detailed within Cadia Stands, the chapter was described as conducting one of their 11-year rites. This would appear to suggest that the chapter was already falling to, or had already fallen to, the worship of Malice prior to their excommunication, perhaps even adopting the worship of the Renegade god from the native population of Skelos. But if this were indeed the case, and that the chapter had attempted to summon Malice into real space prior to being declared excommunicate traitoris, then for what reason could the chapter have had in doing so? Given that Malice is described as being the Renegade god, the very embodiment of the self-destructive nature of chaos, could it be possible that the chapter intended to empower Malice so as to use him against the forces of chaos? The very notion of utilizing the powers of chaos for the purpose of combating against it is not without precedent, as certain elements within the Inquisition have been known to adopt such methods. This is most commonly seen with the beings known as demon hosts. These demon hosts serve as both vessels and prisons for demonic entities, and often such a creature will be created by radical inquisitors in order to either interrogate the demon bound within for information, or to wield them as a weapon against other demonic entities. However, such a process is seen as being utterly vile and unholy, and as such, it is common for many inquisitors charged with creating demon hosts to be convicted of heresy of the highest degree. With this in mind, combined with the fact that the Sons of Malice were originally one of the Astartes Praeses, then it is certainly feasible to assume that the chapter could have attempted such a process in order to weaponize Malice, either out of naivete or desperation, only for them to instead decide to unleash the wrath of Malice upon the Imperium itself, following what they deemed as an act of betrayal. Regardless of the chapter's original intentions, the Sons of Malice are sure to continue wreaking havoc upon both Imperial and heretical forces for centuries to come, assuming that they weren't all immediately butchered out of boredom by their patron god. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.